Hello, everyone. My name is Heather B. Moore.
And my name is Allison Hong Merrill. As co-authors of the Young Readers edition of the Paper Daughters of Chinatown, we are so excited to discuss this true story based on the 6-year-old Tianfu Wu's experience. In 1890, Tianfu's father sold her to pay his gambling debts. Well, Tianfu was sold over and over again until she was finally and eventually brought to San Francisco from China. And she came with a false identity, with false paperwork.
In addition to Tianfu Wu being the main character, we also have Dolly Cameron, who is also the main character in the original Paper Daughters of Chinatown. But we wanted to keep Dolly because we felt like Dolly and Tianfu Wu, they have this extraordinary relationship that eventually develops. So as we know, Dolly works at the Occidental Mission Home. She has agreed to teach sewing classes for 1 year. Of course, this ends up changing, and she ends up spending her entire career working at the mission home and helping these Chinese girls learn English and reading and other skills that will help them eventually become independent. And also another important part of this process is working with these girls and women as they heal from the trauma of enslavement.
Exactly. And as with any historical novel, knowing the context and background of the story can help the readers understand why, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Chinese girls and women were brought to America and enslaved. Well, during the mid 19th century, China lost 2 opium wars to Great Britain, and that devastated the country.
Yeah.
Starving Chinese people went overseas for jobs. Some men left their families behind and came to America for work opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when we were doing this research, finding out things like the gold rush was going on, that brought over a lot of immigrants to work the gold mines. Their families really were starving, they were devastated. And so these men were coming over to send back money to their families. You also had the railroad that was being built. In fact, 75% of the men working on the transcontinental railroad were Chinese. And you had the fields that were being the farms and the crops. But this also created a problem because when the Chinese Exclusion Act was signed by Congress in 1882, this meant that they were trying to stop more immigrants from coming over and taking jobs from the white settlers. And this also prevented the women from coming over, which, of course, the Chinese highbinders and the gang members of the Tong, they found a loophole where if they could forge paperwork for these Chinese girls and women and say they had marriage prospects, they had families, they already have jobs, then they would bring, then these girls could then enter the country. And this is where things went south for the girls. And this is why they were called paper daughters.
For example, when the ship that brought Tianfu to San Francisco and docked at the seaport, and Tianfu saw white police officers at immigration and customs enforcement, when she saw those white officers, she probably felt strange. And also, she probably noticed that she did not dress in, or she did not wear the same kind of dress as American girls or women.
Right.
And also, because Tianfu did not speak English at the time, if she were on the street alone and got lost, she would not be able to ask for directions or to read road signs to get to where she wanted to go. And so I think all these things could, in my imagination, could cause her to feel that otherness.
Yes, and I think during the story that we really feel that during the writing, the researching, We did have to adapt the original story for middle grade readers. And so this was I don't know if it was a challenge or it was just really looking introspectively into how we would feel as a young girl coming into a foreign country, and how we can relate her experiences so that it is an age appropriate book, considering the conditions and situations that these girls and women faced, and so that we could see what Tianfu saw and what she experienced. And so really, so the reader can put themselves in the shoes of the main characters in this story.
Exactly right. And that's why after months and months of researching Tianfu's and Dolly Cameron's lives, it was extra meaningful for us to discover their recorded interviews. And listening to those interviews, it felt like we were sitting in the same room with them as friends and listening to them sharing their own stories. It was very meaningful.
The interesting thing I found when reading about Tianfu's life and the different research books we had is her personality just leaps off the page. And so when we were able to hear those recorded interviews and hear Tianfu's voice, which incidentally is the Stanford Digital Archives has those audio cassette tapes, her personality is just as she is written. And it was just really a delight to hear her words in her own words. So these are some of the things that really struck me with Tianfu's character. And she calls herself Tian, but we refer to her as Tianfu, her full given first name throughout the story. She learned that life is not fair. And I think that really relates to children and all of us. But she also learns how to deal with rejection at a very young age. This, of course, leads her to really become strong within herself and to figure out what is her value as a person. And she also learns to, of course, better herself through education and empathy as she's living at the mission home. She did not go through some of the harrowing experiences that the older girls went through. So she learns to have compassion and sympathy for them. One of her most difficult challenges in life is because she was rejected and sold by her father, is she rejects love in many, many forms. Even when the staff members or some of the other girls in the mission home, even though when they're kind to her and try to befriend her, she rejects that over and over. And we see this in her character arc, that she eventually learns what unconditional love is, and she eventually learns to trust that she can be loved.
Tianfu had to learn a new way of life because Tianfu was born into a very wealthy family with servants at home, right? And her bound feet were a symbol of her family's high social standing. And after she was sold and brought to America, she had to do forced labor, and that was all new to her. And when she was learning to adjust to this new lifestyle, she also had to learn to cope with anxiety, abuse, and fear. After she was rescued and brought to the mission home, she needed time to heal from the post-traumatic experiences. And this is a long process for anyone. Not to mention for her as a little girl, I imagine it was very difficult.
And I think that also is relatable for a lot of kids in our society today is they see things and experience things that maybe adults haven't had to deal with when they were in school as well. And so Tianfu becomes a very emotionally relatable character. I also found it interesting that her story, and this was, of course, not on purpose, is it really does parallel the story of Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Because if we think about it, Dorothy comes into Oz, which is a new land for her. She sees strange people and strange things. The animals are talking, the monkeys are flying. There's a major villain, the Wicked Witch of the West, and she has to learn to protect herself from that darkness, which is what Tianfu learned. Tianfu needs to learn a new language. She encounters new friends that she needs to trust. So we have in the Wizard of Oz friends like the Tin Man who just want the best for Dorothy and they want to help her to go home. And ironically is Tianfu, as she fights and fights against her situation, she realizes that she can create a new home. And I think until she realizes that she can create a new home, that she doesn't find that peace in her life. There is also another character named Kum Kwai in the story that befriends Tianfu, and Kum Kwai has an interesting kind of capture kidnapping. She's whisked out of the mission home, and the city learns about it. And in fact, the Stanford students find out about this kidnapping, and they riot and they protest and they do this huge march and they demand that the government and the authorities and the leaders bring Kum Kwai back and give her freedom back. And so you kind of see this parallel as well in Tianfu's experience and with Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, how these people are gathering around each other. And it really is definitely a testament to how humanity, how you can have a lot of light, a lot of passion, and a lot of support.
Exactly. I agree with you, Heather. And I feel like the willingness or the desire to want to help those in need is human nature. It's universal. And for Tianfu, she just had to learn to trust those people who want to help her because of her background, because of her past experiences that caused her to not trust people easily. And that was one of the obstacles or challenge that she had to overcome to trust people who want to help her.
Right. We see this in Tianfu's character arc as she is fighting against authority. She is angry. She's bitter. She's breaking rules. She doesn't trust the staff members at the mission home for a long time. And simply because she has been betrayed over and over by the adults in her life. And these are really natural actions of children that have been neglected or abused or through traumatic experiences. So as teachers and educators and librarians and parents, when we see those signs, then it needs to be a message to us that this child needs our help.
Yeah.
And this child, they need more resources, they need the compassion, and not to be continually punished over and over because they are reacting to the trauma they've experienced.
In Tianfu's case, she was brought to America to be a domestic laborer. And so she did not have that kind of help when she first came to a new country. So Tianfu felt out of place in all these new homes that she was so into, because she was sold as an employee, or not an employee, just, to do forced labor. And in her heart, Tianfu felt like her true home was where her mother was. And in the book, Tianfu makes two promises. And the first promise she made to her own mother in China, she promised her mother that she will return home. And the second promise she made to Dolly Cameron, who was her second mother. And she promised Dolly that she would grow up and help her, meaning she will grow up to be Dolly's interpreter and to go with her on those rescue missions. And in the book, Tianfu was able to keep both of the promises that she made. 24 years after her father has sold her, Tianfu was able to go back to China in 1916. Unfortunately, she never found any of her family. And because she did not have any blood ties to her motherland, she eventually came back to San Francisco, to the only home she knew, to the only mother she had left, who was Dolly Cameron, her second mother who helped raise her.
And I love that full circle moment, because so many of us in life, children, adults, we don't get to live our plan A and sometimes our plan B. And sometimes we have to redefine our home and we have to move, our family's dynamics change, and maybe not to the extreme as Tianfu Wu, but we're all going to go through those type of transitions. And even though the mission home provides this safe space for these Chinese girls and young women, they still have to go through the healing process. They're not enslaved in the way they were before, but they now have to go through another process. And it's something that we see Tianfu go through and the other girls in the mission home go through, and it becomes an example and inspiration for those of us with our own struggles in life.
Exactly, I agree. And even though sometimes it's uncomfortable to learn about some of these historical facts, in this book, we show the readers that the Chinese girls, after they were rescued, they were able to learn new skills, and they were able to learn the language to help them to create a better future for themselves. And they became contributing members of the society. And so even though their stories were sad, but they were also good in their lives after they were rescued.
They were literally survivors.
Mhm.
And we see that all around us today. We see survivors of all kinds of situations. And back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they really were pioneers. And so they were first generations coming over, and they were able to kind of dig out of the dirt a life that they wanted for themselves and their descendants. I think they discovered that education and knowledge was power, and that was how they were going to survive in their new world. Obviously, learning to read and write English helped, and becoming educated and skilled in a lot of different areas that helped them become independent. And I think most importantly is they learned to serve each other and to trust each other and to be there for each other.
It's our hope that this book will instill a passion in kids to seek out truth and to learn our history. By doing this, we can create empathy in our neighborhoods and in our homes and in school, and that will frame a stronger future. And we really hope this book will help build that bridge of understanding, acceptance, and love.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.